What's up, everybody? This is Flashwing. Welcome to podcast number 1 of, I don't know, we'll see how far it goes. This is the first official podcast of my channel. I say official because those of you who have been with the channel for a little while might remember the previous podcasts, which I dubbed as Saturday School, which I guess is a little bit of irony that I'm actually recording this on a Saturday. I say this is the first official podcast because the Saturday School podcast unfortunately did not survive for a few reasons I could probably elaborate here in a minute. Those were primarily podcasts that were political in nature. And while I'll give you a little bit of spoiler alerts, while some aspects of politics will no doubt enter this podcast and other podcasts, it is simply an illustration of a greater point that I can use politics as a specific real world example. I am definitely a news and political junkie, which is why politics and news, as well as just the study of human nature is something that is so near and dear to my heart. I have for a long time been a huge consumer of information on a daily basis. I joke with friends and family of mine where I tell them, I said, I think that I spend about an average of about 4 hours a day, just average, consuming news and political information. And everybody looks at me like I'm crazy. But I find some very interesting and unique ways to manage to squeeze in mostly reading. I don't watch a whole lot of videos, although I do consume a lot more information via video these days, thanks to YouTube, but it is not necessarily political in nature. And I've tried to adjust my focus within the past 6 months particularly to move away from politics and news because of the expressed negativity, but also because it's not very useful in terms of what I do with the information and how I learn and apply it. It's just simply what's going on. Most of the time, it's various forms of spin with some straight outright lies mixed in with it. So it's not useful information, in my opinion, other than some situational awareness. So that being said, if you were fans of the Saturday School podcasts, I certainly hope that you will enjoy these more, because I think that you're going to come away with these different podcasts having learned something, or at the very least, having been exposed to a different viewpoint, which I think is, above all, probably the number one goal. So we have a few new subscribers to the channel. I say a few because, this channel has always been very slow with growth. That's nothing that I am ashamed of. In fact, I actually think that gives me a few unique advantages over some of the larger channels, which are expressly basically boxed into providing content of a particular type or genre, because their livelihoods depend on it. Their major source of revenue generation is dependent upon it. So I actually think that having a very slow growth audience on my own channel gives me the unique advantage to try out different things such as this and do some experimentation, but more importantly, be able to provide content as I want to change things up and try new things and experiment, which this is most definitely part of that. So if you happen to be very, very new to the channel, I have reason to believe that you probably came here because of either review videos or first ride and review videos or gear review videos, but mainly something that's motorcycle oriented. And you're probably wondering what the hell you're doing watching a podcast on a motorcycle channel. The best, simplest explanation that I can give you is that this is not an express motorcycle themed channel. This is a me channel. This is a channel. This channel is an expression or an extension of my own interests and my own outlets when it comes to creation and my interest within media. To be perfectly honest, the podcast actually fits my style of delivery and my need to dive in very deeply into topics, more so than any other form of media creation here on YouTube. Now, the question, the one question that I'll answer, and of course all this is rhetoric, maybe some of you care, but it's good to have some background on this. Why now? Why a podcast? What is happening? What the hell is going on around here? Very simply, like I said, I tried a few podcasts about a year ago, and what prompted me to shut them down was mainly because of this significantly larger amount of negativity that came as a result of my views. I don't exactly have views that are considered very popular on YouTube. YouTube in general has made no qualms about the fact that they do, in fact, support political ideas that follow a very specific ideology. And if you happen to wander outside of that ideology, especially when it comes to what their advertisers support, you will be not necessarily struck down, although some channels have certainly experienced that type of discrimination. But you'll certainly be punished from a revenue standpoint. And but more importantly, there were grave concerns about the impact that my own viewpoints could have on other areas of my life, including my employment, and a number of other areas, should anything that I post become viral or certainly noticed by larger media figures. So I have been really doing a lot of soul searching and trying to understand a way that I can deliver my viewpoint and my ideas in a way that is not expressly political. And one, because that kind of gets me out of the hot water of politics and, having to be sort of the full-time representative of every single group that I belong to or every single company that I work for, even though I do not, under any circumstances, claim to speak for those individuals or groups. But nevertheless, people don't let you get away with that. They find ways to attach you to those groups and do so for the express purpose of silencing you. The reason why I've wanted to try this again, I've been actually consuming a lot of podcast material, and of course, the one thing that has become incredibly apparent over the past 12 months is podcasts have been they've been basically defying the rules of YouTube, which if you've listened to anybody who's had a channel for a long time, or if you engage in any kind of educational programs with respect to YouTube videos, they all tell you the same thing, which is that your videos have to be highly engaging, they have to be entertaining, and most importantly, they have to be between 4 and 6 minutes, with like 8 minutes being the maximum that you can utilize before people lose attention. And podcasts have been defying that tremendously. In fact, you see some of these podcast channels where the videos are 1, 2, sometimes 3 or more hours long, and people are tuning in and paying attention. Now, to what extent, I don't know. I can't see all of the back end data for these particular channels and their videos. But the point being, some of these channels are 100,000, 500,000, 1 million subscribers to these channels. And they're good. The podcasts are good. The guests that come on are good. The topics are good. So it's very easy to understand why they have the level of success that they do. But that got me thinking that it's very obvious that this type of media and this method of delivery is not completely dead in the sense of that it's got no traction whatsoever on YouTube. So that being said, I thought I'd take the chance to put something out there for you. And of course, trying to decide what was it that I wanted to talk about, because Lord knows there's a lot to talk about. I know my process, I guess, for creating videos, and it's no exception here, is I'll be going through the normal course of my life, and I guess every time that I put out a piece of media, especially when it is very topic-oriented and it has anything to do with my own philosophy, my own principles, something that is more so than here's something that's happening in my life, I start with a sort of an empty reservoir. And that reservoir begins to be filled as I consume content that holds particular themes, or if I start to formulate an idea or a central theme through all these different sort of unconnected stories or videos that I watch, and it gets to the point where the reservoir just sort of fills up and boils over at that point, and I know that I need to get this stuff out when I'm thinking about it all the time, when I'm sort of interjecting it into conversations that I have with people, especially when it has nothing to do with what I'm thinking about. So I begin to see these warning signs that I need to get this material out. And this is most definitely one of the better outlets, YouTube in general, to deliver that content. Normally, I do this. I've been doing this with like a podcast style video where I put the camera on me, and I film for about 25 minutes, and I get it out of my system and I post it. This is obviously differently. Number one, there's no camera today. All my camera equipment that produces any type of decent video doesn't last for more than about 30 minutes at a time, and then I have to stop the camera and start the camera. So today, you guys are just going to have to suffer without any video, which means you're just going to have to sit down and strap yourself in, put on your badass set of headphones, and get yourself a nice stiff drink that you can sip on throughout the entire course of our conversation together. And let's get ready. Let's start talking. So that's ultimately kind of all of the encompassing stuff that brought me back to doing something that's a podcast style. It gives me the freedom to really move from one section to the next of a topic and really deliver the kind of in-depth conversation that I want to have that I can't necessarily do even within 30 minutes, depending on what it is that I'm talking about. But more so, I can't deliver the kind of in-depth content that I want to bring to you on. I can't do it on a motorcycle, through a motovlog, and even doing it through a daily vlog is incredibly difficult because it's just not orchestrated enough. Everything is very random. This is a much more controlled, straightforward environment where I can sit down and have a single stream of consciousness about the kinds of things that I'm thinking about and I want to talk about, and I can deliver it to you. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm sure you guys have already looked at the time ticker to see how long this podcast is going to be. I understand if some of you are going to be frightened away by it, but those of you who are willing to stick it out, or at the very least divide this up amongst a couple days to consume, many of you are no doubt long-time, very, very dedicated subscribers who watch pretty much everything that I put out, and you guys have always been very, very appreciative and complimentary. So thank you ahead of time for giving me your time and for sticking with me as I flail around helplessly trying to figure out what to do that makes sense and that's fun. Which brings me to the very beginning of today's conversation. And I guess the overarching umbrella for today, and I even wrote out like a huge monologue here. You guys can't see, obviously, because I got no camera, but you just got to take my word for it. I got my trusty notebook here, and I wrote out this like 4-page monologue that I'm not going to recite for you guys word for word today because it comes across as very robotic. But the very first sentence, I think, kind of summarizes it, where I just say that we have a serious problem in this country today. And everything that I'm going to talk about is an observation and a criticism of the culture and society here in the United States. You're going to probably be able to see some parallels for those of you who are outside of the United States internationally in some of your countries. But if all this sounds very foreign to you, feel free to roll with it. But by no means do not consider this a critique on the area that you live in. This is entirely in the backyards of those of us who live in the United States. But that being said, we have a serious problem in this country, and as a student of history, I'm very well aware of the fact that there's been no point in the history of the United States where there hasn't been some type of turmoil. There's always something going on. There's always a world crisis. There's always threats of war. There's always an absence of peace. There has never been a period, probably really throughout human history, where there's not been something that's been going on, something that instills people with fear, something that keeps them up late at night. But I feel like we are entering a period of time that is vastly different than, say, anything that has happened since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, and even beyond some of the fears that have been wrapped up in various different events, from the first Gulf War to September 11th, which we just passed the 16th year anniversary of that this past week. The things that are happening right now in the United States, culturally, politically, we're entering very possibly a new phase, and this is not a good phase. This is a phase that's quite reminiscent of other points in history. If you're a student of the Civil War, you will probably be able to draw some parallels to the previous decade before the Civil War began, and even pre-Revolutionary War times. You could see probably the preceding 5 to 10 years before the Revolutionary War in particular. There's a lot of really troubling signs, and I don't use these comparisons lightly. I really I don't like talking about things from the perspective of within the United States, from the perspective of anything that involves armed conflict. Number one, because I really truly believe that we have I don't want to say a lot of people, because that's really stereotypical, but I think we have too many people who romanticize the warfare that took place, whether it's the Revolutionary War or the Civil War. They really romanticize what armed conflict would look like in the United States. There's this incredibly false perception that we would just sort of we would just shoot at our neighbors for a weekend, and then everybody would just go back to living their own lives, not understanding that conflict of that type would not only destroy our way of life for our generation, but most likely it would take 1 to 2 generations at a minimum before things in this country would return to any semblance of normalcy that we have experienced. And certainly myself, being 35 years old, it would be a time period unlike anything that I've ever experienced. And most likely I would spend the rest of my life talking about how things used to be if such a conflict were to come about. So understand up front that I don't believe that this is the solution to our problems whatsoever. And in fact, we have a number of different mechanisms that are not only built into the very foundation of the country itself, but we have mechanisms just as human beings, as intelligent, rational thinking people, that should absolutely prevent us from ever descending into the level of madness where we feel like we actually have to pick up guns and we have to murder our fellow citizens and brothers and sisters and parents and children in order to accomplish whatever it is that we're trying to do. So I just want to make that point very, very clear, that I feel like any discussions about this are made from people, or made by people who have absolutely no concept of what warfare really is, what it looks like, what the consequences of it are, or are not students of history and understand the vast amount of human suffering and sacrifice that it took in order to establish this country as it is today, and in fact, fight the last battle of the Revolutionary War to finally settle some long leftover disputes from the framing and founding of the country. So I just wanted to make that abundantly clear before anybody tries to accuse me of taking the subject lightly. And I should mention that I'm approaching this from the standpoint of somebody who's never served in the armed forces. I've never been deployed into military combat, but I'm a student of history, and I'm pragmatic and observant, and while I may not have experienced these things myself, I most certainly take the stories and the reading that I've done quite seriously. And my God, if you know anything about the history, especially of the United States, but even just anything about armed conflict in general, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. The things that it does to people, the circumstances in which they exist, are unlike anything the vast majority of us have ever experienced, and thankfully, hopefully, will never experience. So I know that was very long-winded, but I just want to make that position as crystal clear as I possibly can with everything moving forward. That being said, we have a serious problem, and I believe that we're entering a new, different phase. And I think that I can take some very personal experiences of mine that I've had recently and really illuminate a couple of different things. Number one, I want to illuminate the complete failure that many of these more socially active groups are experiencing, will continue to experience, and why they will experience it, and highlight a specific theme that I have with respect to weakness and strength. I want to talk about some personal experiences of mine that I think will make great examples of my own thought process about why these things happen the way they happen. And, and obviously propose what I feel like is a basic set of solutions, because, after all, if you're going to talk about a problem, there's really no sense in bitching and complaining if you're not going to offer up a solution. So at first, I want to talk a little bit about myself, some of the things that have been going on, because I think that's going to offer some context for those of you that haven't followed me along very specific, haven't followed me along very long, or haven't watched all of the content of the videos. So in addition to the motorcycle stuff, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, the last 2 years have been very, very life-changing. And it started, ironically enough, with the bike. I made the decision a little over a couple of years ago that it was time for me to get on the racetrack. My riding ability with respect to my R1 I was starting to push things on the street hard enough that not only was I getting in trouble with the law, but also I started having concerns about my own safety, and I really don't think the street is a great place to learn how to push the limits of your bike, because it's a pretty good place to get yourself killed. I know that some of you, will tune into YouTube channels where people engage in that type of behavior, and that just isn't me. And it's not something you're ever going to see here. And if you ever have the pleasure or displeasure, depending on how you view it, of riding with me, you may notice a completely different person on the bike, because I do not record the kind of riding when I go out and really push it. So it's not something that I really try to do on the street very often. I'll go out and have some fun. But there was a point in time where I became concerned about my safety and realized I needed to get back to the racetrack. I had been there previously with cars and really enjoyed driving on the track, and I learned a lot, and I became an immensely better driver as a result. So I knew that not only could I push my limits and learn new things on the track with respect to the motorcycle, but it was going to be a shitload of fun too. So at the time, I was about 300 pounds and about close to somewhere in the neighborhood of around 35 to 38% body fat. I was in absolutely no physical condition whatsoever to ride on the racetrack. And I had kind of ping-ponged between, I think I had gotten down to as low as 275 pounds when I did my motorcycle trip in 2014, which I dubbed the Month of Insanity, which if you've not watched that series, I invite you to do so. Taking a Yamaha R1, 5,000 miles across the United States. As you can imagine, some shit happened. But it's a great series. It's something I'll never forget, and I highly encourage you to check that out in terms of some of the best work that I've done in terms of video production and storytelling. So I realized very quickly that in my current physical condition, I was never going to be a formidable rider on the track. And so I knew I needed to do something with my own physical condition. And so I started going to the gym. And what started out as, working on this solo, wandering around a box gym. I mean, working out, as I soon discovered later on, is a skill just like anything else. And you have to be educated on it, and you have to be experienced in it before you really get anything worthwhile out of it. And a fellow friend of mine, someone else who I'd met through my local car club, and also had done some racetrack time as well, was going to a small group gym, or small group training gym here in Chandler, in Arizona. And, he invited me over. They were doing some free programs. I showed up, and I had a great time. And I used to work sales for a number of years, and being sold is one of the most aggravating, annoying things that you could probably do to me. I'm an intelligent human being capable of making up my own mind, and I do not like being pushed or sold. And the owner of the gym, a guy named Ryan Ayler, who's now become a very good friend of mine, never tried to sell me once. And he was just like, "Hey man, well, we'll see you tomorrow." And that type of an approach got my attention, and I really liked the environment. I liked the people. And even though the gym itself was rather expensive, certainly compared to the membership that I had currently, I decided to make the financial investment, and I started going. And you could say the rest is history. I've learned over the course of that time period. I'm now down to 225 pounds and around 22-23% body fat, assuming that the measurements are accurate. It's a huge transformation. I've lost about 75 pounds total, a lot of body fat. I could run 6 miles without stopping. I've done things over the past 2 years, and arguably many of them since January of this year, 2017, that I never thought possible. And there's been roadblocks, plateaus, setbacks, victories, lots of failure. And so every possible thing you can imagine during that time period. And I've learned a lot, not only about myself, but about a lot of other things, a lot of other life-changing perspectives. Because during the course of this, my opinions when it comes to personal growth began to change. And I have discussed this topic in a number of other videos. I'll do my best not to repeat myself. But my own opinions on personal growth have changed. And I began to understand that I needed to start pursuing things, starting pursuing excellence, started pursuing success because I had the ability to. I was given these talents, and I feel like I owe it not only to myself, but also to the people who have sacrificed for me to pursue those talents to the fullest extent of my ability, because I have them, because there are a number of people who don't have those opportunities. And it's important that when we do, that we make the very most of them that we possibly can. And the reason why this is important is because one of the more potent ideas that kind of came about from a lot of this was how powerful the notion of change is when it's focused inward. And this relates incredibly to a lot of the more vocal and active and violent groups that we see right now who are pushing their own political agenda, because it's my opinion that they are not only doing it wrong, but that these are some of the weakest people in the public eye. And I know that will run counter to a lot of the thought process that has been spewed throughout the media. And no doubt, if for some strange reason anybody within the sound of my voice happens to actually support these groups, you should absolutely understand that these groups are incredibly weak. Not only the groups, but the people within them. They are weak people. They're weak intellectually. They're weak emotionally. They may even be weak physically. I don't know. But certainly emotionally, intellectually. And I will get into the reason why in a minute. The thing that I never expected with respect to my own personal change is how much outside external influence I could have on people by simply focusing inward. And I began to understand the immense power that we have that lies within all of us. And I'm not talking about necessarily anything metaphysical. I'm talking about the power to influence, the power to influence in a very positive way. Everything within our society is built to be externally facing. If you think about every facet of influence, every aspect of power and wealth creation, everything is designed to be focused outward. And in fact, whole industries and ways of life have sprung up as a result of this. In fact, I could argue that the vast majority of career politicians that we have today in the United States, on any level, are kept in power and their jobs are kept viable because people look to an external source for their own personal salvation, whether that be economically or culturally or whatever. Everything that we have is designed to be externally facing. Our sources of happiness, our sources of self-fulfillment, our sources of significance, everything is designed to be outward facing. And I don't think that this is I don't necessarily think that this is a taught behavior, although you might be able to find instances where it is. I think that this is sort of a natural manifestation. This is something that just sort of occurs in nature, but we have encouraged it so much that it becomes like a learned behavior, that people observe other people exerting this external influence or looking to external sources for their, like I said, I'll just say that their salvation, but we're talking about like life satisfaction, significance, security, things like that everybody looks outside themselves for this. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, I was a person who did the very same thing. That I thought that my life would be happy if I had certain things, or if I, had certain people in my life, or if my life was surrounded in a particular set of circumstances. I thought this is what being happy looks like to me, or what I imagined in my mind, not realizing that the truth is that I had the power to be happy anytime I wanted. And it wouldn't have mattered how much or how little I had, or where I was, or who was surrounding me. The capacity existed within inside me the entire time. And as a result of that, we do everything wrong. We do like everything wrong. And, the fact that, nobody has taught anyone in any type of a massive way about the enormous strength that we have to focus ourselves inward. We're robbing not only ourselves, but all the people around us of enormous potential. And the thing that I noticed was, as time went on, and it didn't happen right away, it took a long time, I started noticing in changes in like friends of mine and family. And I'm going to back up for just a second. I am in no way taking responsibility or making any claims for the work that my friends, family, or acquaintances have done. Every single person, and if you happen to be one of them listening to this podcast, every single person who has made changes within, the time period that I have been sort of projecting my own changes outward, posting things on social media, talking with people, encouraging people. If for any reason I happen to have been a positive influence, I am in absolutely no way taking credit for the work that's been done. Everybody else had to do their own hard work. They had to make the decision. They had to get their ass out of bed. They had to go out and grind it out. I am not taking credit for any hard work. I would never, ever do that. All I'm simply saying is that on some level, it's like people within my own social groups, that they started seeing the things that I was doing, and they started seeing the changes that were happening with me, and not just physical changes, but mentally and emotionally. I'm thinking differently. I'm speaking differently. I'm encouraging people to do things differently. And I started noticing on some subtle levels that people started making their own changes. I mean, these people are following their own path. They're doing things their own way. But it was like, as a good friend of mine kind of put it really, really eloquently, it's as though everybody was given permission to be better. And I really feel like that's a powerful statement, because in some respects, you could make an argument that the social groups that we have, if you're not part of a social group where the primary emphasis is on being a better person, with growing yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that doing so on your own could be a pretty scary thing, because there's all sorts of these potential negative connotations that come along with that type of activity that you could be viewed as being pretentious, as being self-centered or stuck up or too good for people, or, or even your own, just like who you are becomes so far removed from something that your friends can, or your family can even understand, that you become like this weird alien that people look at. And even though you look human, the things that you say and the things that you do, it's like you're from Mars, man. They look at you and they're just like, I don't understand why Johnny feels the need to get up every day at 4:30 when he's got a weekend and he could sleep in. And why does Johnny have to go to the gym and like kill himself and like, restrict his diet? And then why does Johnny read tons of books? And why does he work 16 hours on these projects at work? And, why doesn't he just chill and take it easy and, like not do so much work? That just seems, I don't know, it just seems weird. Maybe he's on drugs. Maybe Johnny's doing too much cocaine and he's got to get that energy out somehow. It's like that where everybody just sort of looks at you like you're just from fucking outer space. And they don't understand why you work so hard. They don't understand why you have the need to climb the mountain. So, why do you climb the mountain? Because it's there. I never used to understand that. I used to hear that stuff from climbers, and it was like a foreign language. It was just like words came out of your mouth. I knew they were English, but I don't understand what you said. I don't have any idea. So this notion of inward focus is so powerful, and the solution is so simple. Folks, if you want to change the lives of people around you, you don't have to join a church group. You don't have to engage in charity work. Now, I'm not saying don't do these things, but what I'm saying is that if you want to have, especially and I'm guilty of this. Okay, this is a Todd thing too. If you're really preachy to people, if you're really into like telling people this is what you should do, this is what you should think, that's most definitely what people don't respond to. And that's why I think a lot of these really active social groups, especially a lot of these social justice groups, don't realize like how completely, totally ineffective they really are. It's like you folks can protest all you want. You can make as many crafty, witty signs as you want. You can blow up as many buildings and burn as many cars as you want. You can chase off the cops as much as you want. You can engage in all of your little violent bullshit. You can carry your, anti-Nazi baseball bats. You can do whatever you want. You people are weak. You are weak. And you are weak because the things that you are doing do not change minds. They do not change hearts. Now, what they do actually do is they do scare the shit out of people. And fear is a very powerful motivator. And I have no doubt that that's a major, major part of their goal. However, as we just witnessed this past week in Berkeley, that when the police are actually allowed to do their jobs, it's amazing how much law and order can actually be brought to a particular event. We had Ben Shapiro speaking at the UC Berkeley campus, and surprisingly enough, despite the fact that it cost an alleged $600,000 in order to for all the overtime for police security and the various barriers that had to go up, the Antifa groups and associated groups with that organization were not able to pull off the extravagant punch a Nazi in the face kind of nonsense that they've been engaging in other areas around the country. So that being said, all of the efforts, with the exception of generating fear, which I should point out that creating fear with the intention of influencing the actions and thoughts of other people, we call that terrorism. That's the definition of terrorism, folks. So beyond the actual aspects of terrorism, which unfortunately does work, in terms of actually changing people's minds and changing people's hearts, this is about the weakest play that you could make, because it doesn't actually change anything. All it does is make people angry or scared. And those emotions don't last very long, because at some point, people either get tired of being afraid or they get angry enough that they start doing something themselves. Neither scenario is going to be acceptable, in my opinion. But that being said, my point is that on the outside, from the perspective of both the people participating and potentially as onlookers within the news media, you look at this stuff and you think, oh man, these people, I mean, they're everywhere. They're protesting, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're hitting people over the head, and they're burning stuff, they're lighting cars on fire, and they're throwing Molotov cocktails into Target buildings, and they're caused over $1 million in downtown Portland since the beginning of the year. And it's easy to think that they're being highly, highly effective, and I'm here to tell you that they're not. They're not at all, and that's because people don't respond to this type of external influence. They don't. What they respond to are people who actually embody the very things that they believe. And I mean, I hate to like be giving away the master secret here, but I can do so confidently because I know these groups will never, ever, ever actually employ what I'm about to tell you. But if you really want to change the world, if you really want to influence people, if you really want to spread a particular set of ideals and demonstrate that in a way that people will glom onto and incorporate into their own lives, you have to do it inward. You have to be the embodiment of your own principles and your own values and your own morals and your own ethics. You start just simply focusing inward on yourself, and you start changing yourself. And the people around you will begin to notice that. And assuming that those changes are positive, it's highly likely that the people around you will start to pick up on that energy, on that influence, and they will start doing the same thing. They will start not so much emulating your actions, but emulating your attitude, emulating your principles. Think of something very high level. In my case, what's being emulated by some of the people in my own social circle is the desire to change and be better. And everybody's doing that in their own way. I have a friend of mine who I had a great discussion with about how she's been expanding her career to a new job and how she's just been crushing it, man. And she's going in and she's just annihilating training courses, and she's just consuming manuals and process documents, and how she's being involved in new projects to the extent where people that she worked with were calling her Miss Know-It-All, Miss Goody Two-Shoes. And I just told her, I said, just ignore that shit. Because the people who sit around in a professional situation and they call you Miss Know-It-All, it won't be too much longer before they're calling you boss, because that's how it goes. I said, so if you got coworkers of yours that are already talking to you like, that they're jealous of you and they're envious of you, I was like, just let that shit go. You focus on doing you. You focus on being the very, very best that you can, doing the very best job you can, and putting your team in the mission first. And good things will happen for you, because that's how it works. I have another buddy of mine who, I'll say this with the utmost respect and affection, but I never expected him to get serious about physical activity. It just wasn't somebody who ever really seemed interested in it. But I have a buddy of mine who just made the conscious decision not too long ago that he was going to start making physical changes in his life. And him and I, we talked extensively about it. And the best advice that I could offer him at the time, I said, just find something that you like and just start small and work your way up. Give yourself a little bit of a challenge, set yourself up for success. And he's been crushing it, man. He's been crushing it. He just posted that he went and joined the gym, and he just recently posted up that he's gone a full 4 weeks of hitting the gym 3 days a week. And that is so awesome to see. So awesome to see people that are challenging themselves, motivating themselves, and focusing that change inward. Now, I want to go into some depth about the aspects of inward focus and external focus, and kind of talk about how this relates to some of the things that are going on in this country, and continue this overall theme about how we have a problem. So let's just reset for a second. because there's another major theme, something I say a lot, and that is it's not about what it's about. Now, I will say there are probably some people out there that are engaging in all this social activism that actually believe the bullshit that comes out of their mouth, okay? And in fact, most of them may actually believe the actual bullshit that comes out of their mouth. But what I'm going to tell you and what we're going to talk about is the bullshit that comes out of their mouth is not really the thing that motivates them. If you think about the fuel, the what I've heard referred to as the jet fuel that powers their ambition and their desire to get out there and to get battered by cops and put on masks to hide their identity and throw tear gas canisters back at cops, get shot in the dick and then everybody finds out where you work. That the like the motivating jet fuel is not about the specific issue that they are advocating for. Okay. You need to understand that the people like the Antifa people, well, I mean, they're not interested. They're not out there motivated by some inherent fear that they think that fascism is just around the corner. I mean, we could argue very easily that we know that they're not concerned about fascism because they're employing fascism tactics in order to engage in in order to supposedly suppress the very behavior that they're concerned about. But I use these groups as an example because they're the ones that are in the media currently. But I really believe that if you look at a lot of these social justice groups, that you will find a very common buried underlying theme, and that is it's not about what it's about. And so what does that mean? I mean that when you really start to dig deep, I mean, I'm going to start like psychoanalyzing on a very stereotypical level, but just bear with me here. When you really start to dig deep and you look at what is the lowest common denominator in terms of their motivations, like where does it fork? Where did they make one decision versus another that caused them to branch off into this one particular direction? And my honest opinion is that these folks are motivated by emotions that are vastly different than what they express. And if you've ever listened to Tony Robbins in particular, he articulates, I think it's 5 or 6 key factors or needs within life. And a couple of them in particular are the need for significance and the need for security. And I really feel that because if there's one consistent element that you see within this segment of politics is you see a lot of emotion. Everything is emotionally driven. If they disagree with, I'm being very stereotypical when I say they, but it's very straw man, but just bear with me here. When someone from these groups typically sees something that they disagree with, they hate it. I see a Nazi, I hate a Nazi. But when they see something that they like, then that's when they see something that they agree with, they like it. And the relationship is very symbiotic, in the sense of if something doesn't make them feel good, then they hate it and they disagree with it. If something makes them feel good, then they love it and they think we should have more of it. And so the emotional connection component to this is the important thing that you need to keep in mind, that you cannot, that there is no rational thinking that takes place here. Everything is just steeped in an emotional connection. They can't separate the two from each other. And the question is why in some respects, but I think that trying to understand what exactly are these people like, what are they feeling? Like, where does this start? Where do they get their fuel from? And I think that it's a combination. It's one or the other or both, but I think it's feelings of insecurity and feelings of inadequacy. The feelings of insecurity, who knows where they could come from? I mean, depending on where you look at in the country and the particular movement in general, I really feel like there is this there's a real fear of things that you see in politics, of things that you see in society, and they just don't know how to handle living in a world where things are happening around them that they don't like. And it makes them feel very insecure, whether it's about themselves or about their lives or about the world around them. And then on top of it, these are individuals that don't have anything of significance, but have been raised to believe that in order to lead a life that is worthwhile, in order for your life to mean something, your life has to have significance. And then, of course, significance in America is typically embodied in excellence or in being extraordinary. And this is something that it could potentially be its own radio show, but it's a very, very dangerous and often like incredibly deflating way of raising children, where we sort of instill this unrealistic expectation onto kids, who now are, adults or a little bit, or at least somewhere in between, that believe that the only way that their life is going to have any level of significance is if they're an extraordinary person. If they're rich, if they're famous, if they're powerful, if they're known somehow. Then, but the notion of sort of living an ordinary life where you have a job and you have some hobbies and you have some kids and you have a family and you grow old and you die, that's considered to be an insignificant life and one that is not worth anything. And that's the honest truth. I mean, you look at, you can just look around your own life, whether it's your friends, your family, your kids' friends, and you're going to find somebody that you can readily identify who is trying to live a life of being an extraordinary person, but extraordinary from the sense of that they want to be rich, famous, or powerful as a way of making their own mark on the world and therefore living a life of significance. And so when you put these two things together, when you put together the emotion of feeling insignificant and the emotion of feeling insecure, these are considered to be two major life needs. It creates a very negative set of emotions, and this is something that these people are carrying with them through their life. And but the next component of this is that I don't believe very many, if any, of these individuals are introspective enough, one, to be aware of the fact that they're feeling these emotions, and number two, they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to face them. They don't know how to translate them into their day-to-day lives, and they most certainly don't know how to conquer them. So all of that, if you wrap that all together, as humans, as people, we need to understand things, even if that means translating something that is unknown to us into something that's known. I mean, you could argue that we do this in a very metaphysical way. We take something. I mean, if you look throughout human history, when there was an astrological event or something on Earth, we've created stories and mythologies and all sorts of ways to explain things that we didn't understand. And I believe that these same individuals just simply translate these emotions of insecurity and insignificance. I think that they try to translate them into something that they do understand. And what they understand is pain. Pain is something, that's universal. We all understand pain. We all have pain. Some of us more than others, but we all have pain. And so they translate something into pain. Well, the next step from this is a lack of personal responsibility. And this is something, whether I talk about it now or I talk about it later, I want you to understand that personal responsibility is the core. When you start talking about personal improvement, personal change, elevating yourself as a human being, personal responsibility that's the meat, that's the core, that's the bone. Without personal responsibility, you have nothing. You have no foundation. You have nothing to sit on. Everything that you will try, and you cannot build anything of significance in your life if you are not willing to exert personal responsibility. If you're not willing to take responsibility, if you're not willing to assume responsibility, nothing that you try to build will matter. It won't stand the test of time. It will not last. And I don't see any evidence of personal responsibility within any of these social justice groups. Now, you can try and make the argument that they're exercising personal responsibility because they're going out and trying to do something about it. Let's remember, they're not doing anything because they're weak. They're not doing anything except pissing people off and being arrested and thrown in prison. They're not doing anything. They're not making any change. Nobody woke up. Nobody woke up and saw Antifa running through the streets of Charlottesville, okay, and was like, oh my God, I have been wrong my whole life. Just like nobody saw the white supremacists in Charlottesville and was like, holy shit, I've been riding the wrong train for a long time, man. I need to hop on this white supremacist train and I need to ride this bitch all the way to the station. I mean, if anybody did that, like, they're like a fucking basement bottom dweller, and they were probably just looking for an excuse to go nutsoid off the deep end anyway, okay? So you're just going to have to trust me. I strongly believe that nobody was watching the events that are happening or unfolding with these protest groups and thinking to themselves, man, I got to get me some of that. Everybody is involved with these groups for a reason other than what they are preaching that they are there for. And so let's continue with that. So what I'm talking about is the case of personal responsibility. These people are not exercising personal responsibility. In fact, there's a significant lack of it, because if they had personal responsibility, you would see a completely different set of behavior. So you have this pain translated from feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, and you have a lack of personal responsibility. Now you're faced with the fact that you have this pain, but you don't. If you're a person that doesn't exert personal responsibility, you can't. You short circuit if you feel your pain and realize that it's a consequence of your own actions, or that you're responsible for your feelings of inadequacy and you're responsible for your feelings of insecurity. So we have this victim mentality and this victimized culture within the United States, and it's like a foul stench, and it's everywhere. People who are climbing on top of each other and stepping on each other's faces to be the supreme victim, to be the one who has been wronged the most, the one who has had the most taken from them, the one who is the least responsible for all of the atrocities that have happened to them in their lives. We have a very strong, prominent, and very, very much alive victim culture within the United States. And so if you're somebody who feels pain and has absolutely no interest in taking personal responsibility for it, you have to find another source of the cause of that pain. And that means, of course, focusing your attention outward. And this is where we get to the beginning of the external focus. So you're externally focusing your pain on another source. And of course, that source is going to be, I don't know, it's going to be the government, it's going to be the cops, it's going to be white people, it's going to be black people, it's going to be Hispanics, it's going to be the Border Patrol, it's going to be Donald Trump, it's going to be Nancy Pelosi, it's going to be Mitch McConnell, it's going to be Chuck Schumer, it's going to be Rush Limbaugh, it's going to be President Barack Obama, it's going to be Bill Clinton, should I keep going? I mean, did I at least name somebody on that list that you probably have pointed to and you go, God damn it, it's that guy's fault. It's that woman's fault. It's those people. It's their fault. And I'll just cut to the chase and be like, no, actually, it's your fault. It's your fault. But again, that's a whole other radio show, It's going to take some time for me to break that down too. But I can give you some great sources of people who can already do it for you too, because that's where I've learned this. I've learned this truth about life. So they blame somebody else. But you know, they'll blame nameless, faceless people. They blame the man. They blame corporations. They blame the deep state, the establishment, the rich. You know, it's anybody. Most often you see people blamed who don't have a face, because people with faces can be defeated, shut down. They can be rendered insignificant. But an idea, you know, when you talk about the rich, there's always going to be rich people. You know, whether there's a lot or a little, there's always going to be rich people. So you have like an endless supply of blamable people, because there's always going to be rich people to blame. You know, there's always going to be illegals to blame. There's always going to be blacks or whites to blame. It doesn't matter, right? You're going to find somebody. If you have this mentality, if you have this victim mentality, you're going to find somebody or something to blame. If there is one thing I know about people, it is the unstoppable human ability to rationalize anything. Anything can be rationalized, including who's responsible for your pain, especially when you're not willing to blame yourself. So these folks gravitate towards whatever cause happens to fit their own brand of victimization, whether it's feminism, or it's Black Lives Matter, or it's Antifa, or it's the crazy white supremacist, or, I mean, you know, pick your group. And be very clear. Now, this isn't, you know, I approach this from one particular perspective based on my own political beliefs, but understand that, you know, there's virtually no one is blameless here, okay? You see this, you'll see the same behavior. And again, let me just place an asterisk next to this, because this is important to understand. Any place where you see people who are acting on emotions that are other than what they project them to be and are refusing to take responsibility for them, you're going to get this type of behavior. That includes conservatives, libertarians, anarchists, communists, socialists. I don't care what your ist is, you're going to find this. And the key here is to try and cut through the bullshit, and for everybody to realize that all of this external focus is not changing minds and hearts. That if you want to change people, if you want to influence people, if you want people to really see your side, you have to start focusing on yourself. You have to start living and embodying the very thing which you claim is going to save the planet. You know, if you're a person who's advocating for racial equality, or equality of wages, or equality of any kind, you need to understand that preaching to people about it and forcing things down people's throats, whether through the court system or through the legislative system, it will not result in the change that you want. It won't. You have to start living and embodying these beliefs inside you. You have to change who you are fundamentally as a person and demonstrate that change for everyone to see. But see, here's the key. You have, I guess after knowing all that, and you might actually feel like you've actually got yourself a brand new strategy, and before you put your boots on and run out there and start bashing people's windows in, you have to understand that the notion of personal improvement and personal change and a lot of these social justice groups, they are completely incompatible. It is an oil and water scenario. I guess that's kind of the trick with all of this. Because as you began to explore, now let's just say hypothetically that, you know, you take my advice and you actually start, you know, working to change yourself, and you're like, yeah, you know, I'm going to start living and embodying these things that I believe. You're going to discover very quickly how much in control of your emotions that you really are. And you're going to start actually examining yourself, maybe even from the outside, if you're that strong intellectually and emotionally to do so. And you're going to start discovering that you can feel however you want to feel about whatever you want to feel about. that you are in complete control of everything. You're in complete control of your intellectual faculties, your emotional faculties. You are totally in control of every aspect of your life. And if you want something to manifest, it may take time, but you can manifest it. And I'm not talking about, like shit appearing out of thin air here. I am talking about if you're a person right now who is bogged down by problems at your job, and you're looking at your situation and you're thinking to yourself, I have no idea how I'm going to make ends meet. I've got these financial problems. I can't make any headway at work. You need to understand that you can change your situation. Your situation can be made better. I'm not telling you that it's going to be easy. I'm not telling you that it's not going to take hard work and sacrifice, because it will. But you are not powerless. And you most certainly do not need to depend upon the generosity of complete strangers in order to get things done. Sometimes someone comes along and helps you out, and you really need it. But I mean, to think that it's impossible without a government program, without a government handout, without forcing big corporations to redistribute their wealth, without forcing the rich to redistribute their wealth, to think that, it is entirely possible for you to dig yourself out of however deep a hole you've dug, and you could do so without anybody else needing to intervene. But it's going to take time. It's going to take effort and sacrifice, hard work, tears, blood, sweat. But you are in control. This is the open secret. But people won't tell you this stuff because we have so many individuals in all different areas of our society and our economy whose very livelihoods depend on the snake oil that they peddle every single day. Take politicians, for example. Okay, this is a very basic idea of how politics works in modern day America today. Is you belong to a group of individuals who feel disenfranchised economically, disenfranchised, culturally, whatever it may be. And then you have a politician who claims to represent you, and he comes to your group and he says, listen, you people, whoever you are, it's not your fault that you are in the circumstances that you're in. It's not your fault that you're poor. It's not your fault that you're insignificant culturally. It's not your fault. It's the fault of insert anybody's fucking name or face here. Okay. And I am here to represent you and protect you. I am going to give you whatever it is that you want. All I need is your vote. All I need is your money. And all I need is your undying support. Oh, and I'm going to need some of your freedom too. And then they promise to deliver on this thing that you want, whether it be economic security, health care, the right to marry anybody that you want, including your pet rock. It could be pick any issue that you want. And you will see at the very core of that issue is typically a politician going to a group of people or an individual or what have you, and promising to right all their wrongs in exchange for their undying votes, and endless supply of campaign cash, and most likely some of their freedoms too. And all these politicians are interested in, truthfully, is more power and more money. If they already have the money, then they just want more power, but that's it. And in many cases, it's the power to influence your life and to make you live in a way that they feel is the best. And in many cases, that's an extension of the groups they represent, because let's face facts. Like I said, you have these individuals who are trying to seek security and significance, and they can't handle the fact. They can't handle the fact that there are people around them that are living their lives in ways that they find grotesque and disgusting, and they make decisions that they think are awful and stupid and wrong, and and they just need to stop. And these people, they can't live next to they can't live next to a neighbor who doesn't recycle. And if they won't do it voluntarily, then I'm going to go to the city council and we're going to pass a law that says if you don't recycle, then you're going to get fined. We're going to make it painful for you not to recycle because, God damn it, if you don't recycle, then the climate's going to change. And if the climate changes, we're all going to die. That's how this stuff starts, is people just can't handle the fact that there are other people out there who do shit differently. And instead of just actually exercising true tolerance, or, as I've been advocating, embody your own sense of, what the perfect world should look like and live your life that way, and just influence the people around you based on the things that you do, they have to force other people to live a certain way. And they do it through the legislative or judicial process typically, or in the case of some of these other more extreme groups, they do it with violence and fear. Not realizing that at the end of the day, that doesn't change anybody's mind. I mean, sure, you might be forced legally into behaving a certain way, but I mean, how long is that population going to continue to exist that way before they get fed up and decide that they've had enough? And again, I'm not making any threats here. I'm just simply telling you how human nature has reacted throughout the course of human history. Is that sooner or later people get sick and tired of dealing with somebody else's shit, and they say, enough is enough, I'm done. I'm not doing this no more. I'm tired of living in fear. I mean, that fear and anger are two emotions that require consistent energy and powering in order to keep them alive. After a while, you just get sick and tired of feeling them. You get numb. And let me tell you something. You get people who are numb to fear, they do some crazy shit. When they're just not afraid anymore, or they're so used to being afraid that it's like, you know what, I really don't care anymore. So I'm just going to go do some crazy shit because that's the only thing that makes me feel alive. I'm just telling you how people react and how these things can just manifest and grow out of control. But we have people who are part of these movements who seem to think that there's like no end to this. But that's also part of the problem, is that when you really look at some of these social justice groups, and it really speaks to what I've been talking about, which is this endless need to satisfy this pain that these folks have inside them, this pain that has been translated from a feeling of insecurity and inadequacy. These are movements that are designed never to end. Whether it's movements for equality or movements against, any of these movements, there's no definition of done. There's no definition of done. And we've seen even fairly recently where movements there's victory after victory after victory. This is a very, very important point. There's something that conservative commentators in particular they talk about this topic and they never understand it. They're like, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And that's progressive groups in particular have been scoring victory after victory after victory after victory socially for, like, say, the past, 20 years. Progressives themselves might disagree with this, but I'm here to tell you, like, you guys have been winning, okay? You guys have been winning / have won the culture war, all right? But we see progressives grow more and more extreme, more and more violent as time goes on. The more they win, the more outrageous they become. And conservative commentators in radio and TV and in print, they look at this and they're just like, this is utterly bizarre. And it's not that they're happy that the circumstance is happening, but they're just sort of trying to make sense of the madness. Like, how is it that these people keep winning and yet they keep getting angry? Well, the answer is, the reason why they get angrier or they get more violent or extreme is because the victory doesn't bring the satisfaction that they think it will. I mean, it brings a temporary high. In the same respect, like somebody, there's research that shows that when in the professional environment, that if you raise someone's pay, their productivity goes up. But everybody's got this baseline that they operate at. So you raise somebody's pay, and you'll see a temporary increase in productivity. But at some predetermined point, depending on who you are, that productivity is going to slump back down, and they're going to return back to their baseline, because within professionalism, money is not one of the primary drivers of productivity. I won't get into that because, again, that's a whole other radio show. But there's a similarity here, and that is that it's because it's not about what it's about. If these movements were inherently about the things that they were claiming to be about, once they got what they wanted, they'd be done. They put down their pitchforks or their fucking tiki torches, and they would go home, and they would spend the rest of their lives with their family, celebrating their victory and enjoying the fruits of their labor and whatever thing it is that they did. But that's not what's happening. And it's not happening because it's not about what it's about. It's about satisfying this pain that they have inside of them, and they can't satisfy the pain because they don't understand what it is. And they don't understand that the only true way to satisfy feelings of inadequacy and insecurity is you have to turn inward. You have to look inside yourself to fix these things. You have to come to terms with the fact that it's your fault that you feel insecure, because quite frankly, the only way to solve that is to be comfortable being insecure. You know, the notion of being comfortable being uncomfortable. That's the only way that people truly make progress in life. That comfort and complacency, breeds not moving or changing anything. And feelings of inadequacy, is just one of those things that you just have to come to grips with, that everybody's significance in life is not necessarily predicated off of how famous you are, how powerful you are, how rich you are, how well known you are, whether anybody even knows that you exist, or whether that you have to find your own sources of significance. You have to find a way you have to find your own way to make your mark on the world, but in a way that is achievable, because the bottom line is that we have created this unwinnable game with this inherent belief that everybody has to be extraordinary. Because as the saying goes, if everybody's extraordinary, no one's extraordinary. There's always going to be a very, very small percentage, the 1% of the 1% of intelligentsia, of music, of sports, of exploration and daring. There's always going to be the 1% of the 1% who are the truly most extraordinary people within our society. And we can't all be that way. We can't all be Einstein. We can't all discover the theory of relativity. We can't all be Neil Armstrong. We can't all be the first person on the moon. We can't all be president of the United States. We can't all be the first woman to do this or the first man to do that. It's just the notion of being extraordinary is in itself a very rare thing. And we do a terrible, terrible disservice as a society, teaching people that the only way for them to actually have any real significance in life is to do something extraordinary. And that's why sometimes we get these people who engage in these incredibly horrific, atrocious acts, whether it be mass shootings or anything that would fall under that banner, because they're just part of themselves trying to be significant, trying to be known, trying to be remembered, trying to, have something on history that says that I was here. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it makes sense when you think about it. And so the thing is that, when I look at some of these social groups and their behavior, and the only thing that I can kind of begin to wrap this argument up about, and the only way I can do it is to say that the enemy is not other people. The enemy is not the white supremacist. The enemy is not the Nazi. The enemy is not the minority or the illegal or the white man or the rich or the corporations, the deep state, the establishment. The enemy is us. We are the enemy. All of us as individuals. We are the battlefield. We are the enemy. We are the hero. It's all inside of us. And it's something that, like I said, it's an open secret, folks. You got books and experts and podcasts and all sorts of stuff out there that people point this out in very plain, obvious terms. But it's not something that you're going to see sort of flopped in front of you on television, or no one is going. You're not going to see this through any major sources of information, because the very people that we would need to project this information make their livelihood on being needed. I mean, like another great example is with respect to education. With the exception of grade school education, because, you got to start somewhere. But I mean, higher education, university, college education, I think that higher education is dead. I truly do. I think it's dead. I mean, there's still some fields that require extensive higher education on a graduate level, but like the undergraduate level, that education's dead. It really is. It's what you see is a lifeless carcass, like something at a weekend at Bernie's that we're still sort of hauling around pretending is actually a real live person, but is really just a dead, rotting corpse. And that's higher education. Higher education has become, it's become a cesspool of ideology, and no one actually learns anything anymore. People just learn how to be angry. People learn how to hate. People learn how to regurgitate shit that other people have told them. No one's learning how to think for themselves anymore. And the internet is the real form of higher education. There are so many people who are, I mean, my God, I just think about, like I watch, I've started, I'm a little late to the party, but like I've started really diving into a lot of stuff on Joe Rogan, and I watch Stefan Molyneux with his philosophy podcast, which, he's got like 600,000 subscribers. Joe Rogan's, I think he's above 1 million. He's like 1.5 million now. I just recently started watching Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink, I discovered him through a friend of mine, but I happen to also be reading his book, Extreme Ownership, right now. And all these people they're utterly fantastic. And the things that you can learn and the insights that you can gain. And this is the kind of information that I absorb every day. I consume this shit like a sponge. And I don't have time for television. I don't have time for video games. Like, my poor girlfriend teases me because she's a big Game of Thrones fan, and she keeps trying to get me to watch Game of Thrones. And I'm just like, I have no interest in it whatsoever. And truth be told, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in entertainment in general. I play video games every now and then, but I'm just a constant consumer of information. But I'm learning so much, and I'm learning things about myself. I'm learning new perspectives, new different ways to think. I'm questioning stuff that I used to assume was a certain way, and it's stuff like this, where I was one of the people who thought that everything within my life that had any meaning or value was always found outside myself. And I thought that the only way to influence people was to tell people, you need to stop doing this, and you need to start doing this, and you need to read this, and you need to think that. And nobody fucking cares about that stuff. Nobody gives a shit about what my opinion is with respect to, anything. At the end of the day, my purpose here is not to stroke my own ego by pretending, by going on and on about how much I know or trying to impress you with my knowledge. The only goal that I have is to turn your head in a particular direction and show you something you haven't seen before, and then go figure it out on your own. Go seek your own research. Go do, just the most important thing is to emphasize change, growth. Just be better. And in this case, what we have is that we have a societal and a cultural crisis on the horizon, because we have this mad rush to victimization by all of these groups who are simply engaging in this totalitarian, tyrannical behavior, where their end goal is to take control of the reins of government and of our government system for the express purpose of legislating behavior and legislating how to think, how to act, how to talk. The free speech, the free speech arguments. Things have degraded so much now that you have some of these ignorant snowflakes running around talking about how speech is violence. And their justification is that because the things that someone says hurt them emotionally. And because because you're talking about people who can't think rationally and critically about their own feelings. So they interpret any pain as pain. It's not delineated between emotional pain or physical pain. Because something that they hear or see offends them, they feel that as emotional pain. And because pain is pain to them, it's the same thing as if you hit them upside the head with a baseball bat, because that's pain too. So speech causes pain, which is akin to violence, and therefore speech is violence. I mean, that's the insanity that is being permeated. And this isn't like a couple of crackpots. I mean, like, we're seeing a growing number of people who are spouting this insane rhetoric. And I mean, granted, a lot of them are sort of all, collated in colleges right now, but I mean, they're going to be out in the workforce soon. They're going to be out in the real world. And of course, the real world is going to stick its size 16 boot up the asses of these people. And many of them are not going to be able to handle the fact that the world is encompassed and made up of people and things and situations which they don't agree with. But there is another point that I want to make to all this. Speaking of Jocko Willenick, I happened to wander through his podcast number 12, and I will link this in the description for you guys to review later. And I double dog dare you people to go listen to this. But I'm going to warn you, it's thick. In this particular podcast, Jocko is reviewing a book called The Forgotten Highlander, and it is about a British soldier. I don't know the particular details, but a British soldier who was captured by the Japanese in the Second World War and his experiences as a prisoner of war in a POW camp. And you want to talk about, I mean, if you're somebody, and really like look at me here, okay? Look at me. If you happen to be a person within the sound of my voice who looks at your life and thinks that you're oppressed, that you're suffering, that you're marginalized, that you're discriminated against, I double dog dare you to go listen to this podcast. And I mean, I need you to fucking listen to like the first hour as he reads this book. And let me tell you something. You're going to learn what real slavery and human suffering sounds and looks like. And this ain't the kind of thing where it was like your great-great-grandfather of whom you've heard stories, and somehow those stories cause you emotional pain and therefore cause you physical pain, and you're able to draw a direct correlation saying, well, I was a slave because my grandfather was a slave, or whatever insane rhetoric or thought process that you want to employ to somehow connect yourself to something of which you have no relationship to. This is what real human suffering was. And I'll give you a little bit of a preview. It starts out with a story about this British soldier who was on what they called the death rail, when they were building, I think they were building railroad tracks for the Japanese military. And these guys are out in the jungle. I can't remember exactly where the POW camp was. They're out in the jungle. They only have the clothes that they were captured in, which over time completely fall apart because of the harsh conditions of the jungle. They're hoarded together in these little makeshift huts where there's no room for anything. People pissing and shitting right next to where they live and eat, to the point where when the author, his boots completely fall apart because of the harsh ground, because of the because some of the the volcanic rock that is mixed in with the soil just tears his boots apart, and so he's walking around barefoot, having to walk through human feces to go to the pit where everybody takes a shit, where people were so weak. They were so weak and physically frail that they could potentially be overcome by the fumes created by human feces and fall into the pit and drown in people's shit and piss. Imagine dying like that, drowning in human waste because you're so weak that you can't pull yourself out of it. And that's just part of the story on the death rail. It gets worse. The guy they end up getting hoarded together and put into like a holding area inside a Japanese ship. And they get put out to sea with the Japanese Navy, and they get fucking sunk by an American torpedo. And I mean, 1,500 people at a time in these ships were drowning. They weren't being killed by the torpedo blast. The ship was being sunk and sent to the bottom of the ocean, and people were dying and drowning. This guy manages to get out of the ship and survive, manages to make it to the surface of the sea and get himself on a rescue boat where people were drowning because, again, they were so physically frail and their minds were so fractured that they were nuts. And they were drowning and they didn't make it. He gets on the boat and he manages to make it to safety, only to get recaptured again by the Japanese and sent to Nagasaki. And if you guys know anything about the Second World War, spoiler alert, we drop a bomb in Nagasaki, a big one. And the guy survives because he was far enough outside Nagasaki that he wasn't impacted by the blast or by the radiation, and gets rescued by the American military. And even he talks about like they get shipped off to an American military base and they're being processed and cleaned up and, you know, trying to get nourishment back into them. And he's talking about how they were in line for the showers. And they had guys that were dying there. They managed to survive all of this pure, unbelievable hell. And they died at the base waiting to get into the shower before being processed and actually like taken care of medically. I mean, and the millions of people who were slaughtered during the Second World War and these POWs, the treatment by the Japanese was beyond inhumane. It was hellish. I mean, death to some of these guys would have been a welcoming. I mean, this is, and I mean, it's important to listen. This is a fantastic, I mean, I'm thinking about even picking up this book, despite the fact that it's so disturbing, because it ends on an incredibly positive note where the author talks about how his experiences made him into the person that he was. And for as awful as it was, he talked about how it fueled his desire for the rest of his life to help other people. And how he lived to be 90 years old, and he lived a very full life, got married, had children, had a great family, that he managed to make something incredibly positive out of the pure human suffering. And those words don't even quite capture the darkness, the dredges of the capacity for inflicting horror on another human being. And the reason why I bring this up, and you should absolutely go listen to it, is because these words like oppression, slavery, persecution get thrown around, and their meanings are polluted, and the people who use them have zero real context. I mean, everything is relative these days, right? And there's something that, and I keep kind of backing up a little bit and kind of qualifying, but it's important to fill these gaps in. I think it's important. You don't, just like you don't change minds and hearts through protesting and signs and breaking shit and blowing shit up. You don't change people's minds by trying to belittle their pain or to try and tell them that their pain does it mean anything because their pain is not as great as somebody else's pain? And we do see a lot of that within the victim mentality, which is, well, you don't have the right to say, that you're oppressed because, your pain is not as much as my pain. We see that a lot. And we hear that a lot. You don't win the minds and hearts of people by belittling people's pain, because everybody's pain is real to them. Everybody's pain is real to them. Other people's pain is not, but whatever pain you feel, it's real to you. And it's important to acknowledge people's pain and to say, hey, listen, I understand. I understand that you feel this pain. But it is important that we provide context, because I really, truly don't think that enough people appreciate, they don't appreciate this country. They don't appreciate the fact that you won life's lottery just by being born here. There's like 7 billion people on the planet right now, and you have 330 million of them here in the United States. You had a 3 to 4% chance, if you add up all the people in the entire planet, 3 to 4% chance of being born in the United States. I mean, granted, I wouldn't go out and play the lotto with those kind of odds. Or I take that back. I mean, if you had a 4% chance of winning, I think that'd be pretty good, considering like right now with the Powerball is like 1 in 289 million or something like that. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, would you fucking roll the dice on a 4% chance of something? I mean, those are pretty low odds that you're going to make it. So you had a 4% chance of being born just by being born. I mean, and no disrespect to any other first world countries or any other, wherever you may be. But I mean, I'm just talking about the kinds of opportunities and capabilities that you have simply just being a citizen of the United States. Are immense. I mean, as opposed to being born in one of these crazy backward military dictatorships in Africa, or being born in the Middle East and suffering discrimination or mass murder there. If you happen to be a homosexual in Saudi Arabia and getting your ass escorted up to and thrown off of a roof, I mean, if you think about, what people label as oppression, or slavery or institutionalized anything in the United States is so incredibly inflated, because I don't think people have ever really stopped and examined what it's like everywhere else. What it's like to be a woman in some of the more strict Islamic countries where you can't drive, you can't go to school. Let's not point out the fact that we have plenty of places across the planet that engage in straight up humanitarian crises where, human rights violations are unfortunately a way of life. You have mass human suffering all over the planet. And yet somehow we have people within the borders of the United States who have the audacity to claim that they're oppressed. And these are people who come from wealthy families who have gone their entire lives without having to suffer massive persecution or be stoned in the streets because of what they look like or what they believe or what they're trying to do. And many of them are allowed to wander the streets with a megaphone, harassing and bothering, and in some cases even impeding the rights of other people. And they're not necessarily being, beaten to death with batons or thrown in prison for the rest of their lives, brought up on trumped up charges. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not injustice that happens in this country, but what I am saying is that the kinds of human suffering that we equate with language like oppression and slavery and persecution, for a lack of a better description, you people have no fucking idea what you're talking about. No fucking idea. You wouldn't last 30 seconds in the Japanese POW camp that is described in The Forgotten Highlander. Not 30 seconds And I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think I'd last 30 seconds either. You listen to the description about what this man went through, and all I can do is sit there and think, like, how the fuck did he do that? How did he muster the strength from within himself to make it through that? Where and how did he manage to preserve any semblance of his humanity coming out on the other end of that? And that's actually just one of the books. There's another book, I think it was called One Soldier's War, which was discussing the war between the Russians and the Chechens in the mid-90s. And the 180-day experience, I think, of one particular soldier. And that was just unbelievable. A guy watching mortars, like a blue on blue and, what they call a fratricide, where it's friendly on friendly, mortar fire tearing through a building, and two dudes next to the author of this book having their legs torn off, and one guy getting hauled away on a stretcher and being able to come to and be conscious enough to tell the guys carrying him, hey man, don't forget my leg. I mean, it experiences and things that are unfathomable by modern American standards. I mean, unless you served in the armed forces and you saw heavy combat. But for the 99.99% of us that have never, thankfully, had to experience that in our own lives, it's hard to even imagine. Like, you can't even quite quantify it. It's like trying to describe color to a blind man. I mean, I don't want to take away anything from Jocko Willenick, because he said this. He's like, you can't explain war to someone who's never been there. And I don't pretend to understand, but I can certainly look at the circumstances and agree that the language that we use to describe conditions that people live in today is vastly overinflated. The kinds of things that many of these victimized or supposedly victimized social justice groups deal with on a daily basis is an inconvenience. I remember a story that was told to me a long time ago. I had a friend of mine who was Puerto Rican, who was, trying to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, and he's experienced racism before. And I said, okay, give me your best, like, racist story. And he's like, well, it's one time I was going into Chipotle. Yeah, you can see where this is going. This one time I would go into Chipotle and, I order my food. I go up to the counter to pay. And he's, like I say, he's Puerto Rican, he's dark skinned. And he's like, the cashier starts speaking to me in Spanish. He's like, I don't fucking know Spanish, I'm Puerto Rican. And I was waiting for the punchline, and I said, and? He's like, well, that's it. I was like, so that's your racial discrimination? He's like, yeah, man, it's fucking bullshit. I was like, the dude at the counter started speaking Spanish to you because he thought you were Mexican, and you get mad because you're Puerto Rican. And again, like, it's a difficult situation because, again, to him, this was an incredibly painful scenario. But the way that we have to work through this is to understand that the problem here was not that somebody started speaking Spanish to a guy who's Puerto Rican and got upset about it. The problem is that he had the false expectations that everybody should know. And how dare somebody make any kind of judgments or assumptions based on his skin color? How dare they? Well, some people are just bad judgments of character, or just, stupid and do things like that. But I mean, like, what are you going to do? You going to go to Washington and pass a law and change this, or, march through the streets and set people's cars on fire? Like, what's the end game to this? What's the solution? And the thing is that when you try to point out to people that real aspects of like true racism, that it is not happening in the way that their language describes, systematic, institutionalized, like it's fucking everywhere. And it's every time and every place. But then, it's like, because they can prove that racism exists somewhere, it's then translated that it happens everywhere. And it's like, no, you can't do that. I mean, this is cognitive dissonance. This is you're deliberately engaging in these false facts, these alternative facts. And I don't mean to make this a discussion primarily about racism, but I'm using these things as examples in order to draw a correlation. And the fact of the matter is that if this is something that bothers you, you're not going to change the minds and hearts of other people by yelling and screaming at them because you're not who you apparently appear to be to somebody else. You're not. The only thing that you can do is look into yourself and accept responsibility for how you feel about the situation, about how you feel about it. Because again, there's this inherent belief that, that certain people, certain groups, however you want to frame it, that like we all like to think that our problems are special. You don't understand my problems. Bull fucking shit that I don't understand your problems. I try to have this discussion with people. It's like, do you honestly think that I don't know what it's like to be judged by my appearance? Do you think being a 300-pound, 5'10" guy, do you think that I was getting it on with the ladies? Do you think that I was a hot date choice? Give me a fucking break, man. I actually have a vlog where I was kind of tearing internet dating apart, and I kind of did a moment where I was talking about eHarmony. And if you don't know, like eHarmony has a thing where your profiles are kind of connected for a short period of time. You exchange certain types of information. You can try to figure out, if you're right for each other, and you have to proceed through these different steps before you get to the point where you can send each other a message. But at any given time during that process, you can always close the profile out, and then you shut down communication with the other person. But before you do that, you can cite one of 6 predetermined, pieces of criteria, we just don't have any chemistry, or we don't have any interest together. And then there's this other category. And I was like, dear eHarmony, could we please change the other category to you're too fat? Just so that we can have a little bit of honesty, as opposed to pretending it's because our astrological symbols didn't match up or something. No, it's because I was overweight and unattractive. And that was it. I had no. There was a point in time where I used to take that stuff really personally. I used to take rejection very personally, and I used to get so upset because I think I'm a pretty cool guy, and I think that I think that I would have a lot to offer, and so I get so mad until I finally discovered one day that the truth of the matter is that it's not personal. It's not like these women woke up one morning and were like, I'm gonna go ruin this guy's life by using this other category. It just these are people acting in their own self-interest, and that's fine. And it was my fault that I felt that way about it. And until I changed the way I felt about the situation and stopped intentionally taking things personally when someone did something that I didn't like, until I did that, I was just going to sit there and stew in the process, and I was never going to get anywhere. So I had to make the conscious decision to not feel that way about it anymore. I mean, I was in control the entire time. And that's this continual theme that I'm just beating throughout this entire podcast, is you are in control of how you feel about any given situation at any given time. You can control how you react to it. This notion that our emotions exist in some realm that we just can't seem to get our hands around is completely false. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to, the control of how you feel, or being very introspective about, asking yourself questions about, why do I feel this way? What is it that I'm trying to get out of this feeling? That sort of thing takes time, and it takes practice. But to make the claim that such things are beyond your control is again just engaging in the it's engaging in the victim mentality. It's not my fault. I'm a victim. But in this case, I'm a victim of my own feelings, and those feelings are as a result of somebody else's actions. I'm victimized because I'm offended by the fact that my neighbor doesn't recycle. And because if he doesn't recycle, then he causes climate change. And well, climate change impacts my life negatively, and therefore it's violence. So I'm going to go burn my neighbor's house down because they are engaging in violence against me and humanity. I mean, these jokes just write themselves, don't they? You know, like I said, we have the human capacity to rationalize anything. I mean, if I feel that if I can translate anything into pain, and pain is violence, then I can be justified in self-defense and going and burning my neighbor's house down because they don't recycle. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of lunacy that is beginning to permeate, and it's being accepted as being okay. You know, we used to listen to this sort of thing on a societal level and just be like, you keep talking that way and men in lab coats are going to come take you away. Nowadays, we're like, oh, gosh, it's a very intellectual and mature approach to the notion. I mean, like, we're sitting here talking about how I don't have it in front of me, so I can't quote it, but there was an article that I caught where there was basically a couple of professors that were discussing the Antifa movement, and they were on the right track with respect to that we're approaching this new level of this new level of groupthink, but they just completely veered off in another direction. Hang on one second here. I'm gonna find it in just 1 second here. This is the article itself is from the article I'm linking from is actually from hotair.com, but it's from The Atlantic. It says here The Atlantic publishes a column every couple of weeks. First of all, this is from an article on Hot Air from John Sexton. But it says The Atlantic publishes a column every couple of weeks, which features two history professors debating various propositions about current events. And today the edition asks the question, quote, is free speech really challenged on campus, end quote. And it's in respect to Antifa, this is a quote from the Atlantic article. They are not whitewashing intellectual inquiry, just the opposite. Rather than curtailing debate, many students, of course not all, are actually seeking deeper engagement with our history and the way our education functions. I personally am happy that they are paying attention. While some protests against speakers take ugly turns, something that is not particular to our current era, much of the drive to challenge figures invited to campus showed the students are actually paying attention and listening. Are you fucking kidding me? That's not in the article. That's my interjection. But the notion that these protests indicate that people are actually paying attention and that they're trying to take the discussion in new directions. No, they just like to burn things and blow shit up. I mean, these social groups essentially are made up of people who anonymously want to cause complete anarchy. And I don't mean that in anarchism in terms of a worldview. I have a couple of friends of mine who consider themselves to be actual anarchists, and I don't mean to insult that, but I mean like chaos is probably a better term. They're just interested in complete chaos. They're interested in breaking the law and doing so anonymously. Why else do you think these people wear masks? They know what they're doing is going to get them busted, whether legally, socially, professionally. They intentionally conceal their identity so they can act with anonymity, because that in by itself gives them lawlessness powers. They can do whatever they want. And because you got cities like Portland that just, corner off the area and let these people just go through and wreck everything, that's the desire. They don't give a shit about their cause. They don't care one way or another about white supremacists. White supremacists have been around forever. Ever since the Democrat Party formed the KKK. Oh, yes, because you're going to have to follow that rabbit hole yourself thanks to revisionist history. That's been kind of wiped out. But, the notion that white supremacy just sort of like appeared on the radar with the election of President Trump, folks, Nazis and skinheads have been around for a long time, and they tend to work in conjunction with each other because they have similar end goals and they have similar methods of operation. None of this is new, but you're seeing a lot more participation, especially on the younger side within college campuses, because these kids just have a desire for complete chaos. They want to go out, break the law, break shit, blow shit up, hurt people, punch Nazis in the face, because they're emotionally driven by these bullshit political standpoints or political ideologies or political beliefs. That's the thing that gives them they're fueled by inadequacy and insecurity by the things around them, because they haven't been taught to survive in a world where things and people exist in ways that they're not going to agree with or feel comfortable with. And because they don't know how to handle those emotions, and because they only translate them and understand them as pain, and because they're not responsible for that pain, someone else is, they find an external source, and that becomes their focus, and they feel like they have to do whatever is necessary to silence that pain. If it means punching a Nazi in the face, if it means, getting a president impeached, if it means punching, supporters of a particular political figure or ideology in the face, becoming violent, whatever it takes to silence that pain is what they ultimately see as their end goal. But the kicker is that the more these folks win, the more that their victories pile up, the angrier they get, because the pain doesn't go away. Because it doesn't silence the pain, because the pain remains, and they don't know what to do. It puts them in an even greater frenzy. It's almost like an emotional manifestation of the gambler's fallacy, which very quickly is the gambler's fallacy is the notion that behind that around the corner from the next from every loss around the corner is definitely going to be a win. It's another. It's kind of like maybe they call it the free throwers fallacy or the 3-point fallacy as well. But the notion that the more a basketball player misses a free throw or misses a 3-point shot, that it increases his chances of actually making one. And that's a fallacy. And so it's this notion that if I just become more frenzied and I become more angry and I become more engaged, then that will silence my pain. That will satisfy my feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. And it never does. It never does. And that's why everything is so crazy right now. That's why everything is so crazy right now, because of that. And I'll just simply end things here, unfortunately, because sorry for the phone in the background. I'm kind of talking in circles here. And this is my first podcast that I've done for a long time, so I hope you'll forgive me. The bottom line is the enemy is us. We are the enemy. And the only way that and like I said before, the battlefield is inside of us. The battlefield is inside of us. It's in our hearts. It's in our minds. And that is where the real war needs to be waged. And it's so easy. It's the same thing that I tell people about fitness. Everybody thinks that fitness is complicated, and that in order to obtain any type of healthy body or a fit body, that it's complicated. It's not complicated. Just do it. How do I become better at running? Run. Work hard. How do I become better at lifting? Lift. Lift hard. Lift often. Lift heavy. Work. But the bottom line is hard work and sacrifice. That's it. If you show up every day, you work your ass off, and you sacrifice in the pursuit of the goal, you're going to get there. It's it. It's simple. It's nothing complex. It's not a supplement. It's not a workout routine or an exercise, routine or anything like that. Or it's not a drug. It's the same thing here. If you want to have change, if you want to change people, if you want to change the world, you have to be the embodiment of that change. You have to really live your beliefs and be who you want everyone else to be. You have to embody the persona of what you want the world to be. And as the saying goes, be the change you want to see in the world. That's it. And now, accomplishing that is going to be very difficult. It's going to take time. You have to learn. You're going to have to churn through yourself and really face some of your demons and understand them. But you will notice other people around you will start gravitating towards that positive change themselves. Maybe in a different fashion, but they'll do it. And the world will act the way it's supposed to act. And if it doesn't, then you are fully in control of your capability of how you react and feel about it. But at the end of the day, you control your own world because it's all inside of you. So with that, guys, I think we're going to end the podcast today. I do hope you enjoyed the podcast. And as always, feel free to leave your comments, suggestions, leave your hate. I may just choose to ignore it. But let me know what you guys think. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll leave some descriptions in the video description field below. And let's do this again sometime. Until then, this has been Flashwing, and we will see you out there.